The last panel was discussing the scientific feasibility of some of these things, and I was reminded of the debate about geoengineering, the idea that we might need in the very short future, very near future, to come up with technologies to slow climate change or to cool down the planet. And about 5 years ago, the discussions about that topic were very fringe, and there were very few people who were taking it seriously. And then suddenly, there's an explosion of concern, panels, and people taking it very seriously. I think this is one of the reasons why it's important, even though some of these topics, given the complexity of what we've heard over the last day, have to be addressed. And one of the folks who's been thinking about it very forthrightly is Dr. Persson. And it's interesting that we were finished the last panel on some of the topics about authenticity and continuity of the person, because this is in fact what Dr. Persson has been working on until very recently, when he moved to Oxford from Gothenburg University to work with the Australian provocateur Julian Savulescu. Julian and Ingmar together have penned one of the most apocalyptic and millenarian arguments for the necessity, the obligation to engage in moral enhancement. And I have to say that when I first heard and met Ingmar in person, it was in the back room of bioethics, a new bioethics center that was starting in Belgrade last fall. And that social science center that we were at was like a crumbling, abandoned factory. And if you imagine like an old stock room that had been turned into a conference room in the back of this factory, and you had to get through these darkened hallways to get there. In the middle of all of our talks, the electricity kept going out. And so it gave a sense of urgency when I first heard his talk, that in fact the fate of civilization itself may hang in whether we figure out this question of moral enhancement. So I turn it over to Ingmar.
Well, I will be talking about quite my abstract is that the reason I thought when I was invited to this talk, I thought people have heard me talk about this book. So I won't be talking just about the book, I will be saying something new as well. But now I realise when I saw the audience and so on that very, very few people have heard me talking about this book. So what I will be doing is sort of talking about the book, summarising the book, and not talking so much about Nicholas Agar's, I think it's pronounced Agar's argument. The book is, which I've written with Julian Savulescu, it's called Unfit for the Future, the Need for Moral Enhancement. Well, the picture, look closely at the picture, because this is the only picture you'll see, because I'm very bad at making PowerPoint, so it's a very basic PowerPoint. So enjoy this picture. This is actually another, which is, we call it divine mythology, the end of the world. But I shall be talking about the end of the world because there is hope, I think. Most of us think that it would be better if people become morally better. That is to say, we think it would be better if people were morally enhanced by in some way or another, by some means or another. Now, our argument is basically that because of the development of scientific technology, it has become, this desirability of moral enhancement has increased. And the argument is basically this. Maybe this one? Yes. First claim. It's easier for us to harm each other than to benefit each other. I suppose most of you have access to a car and you live in a densely populated area. So whenever you take a ride, you can kill dozens of people just by sort of speaking up and allowing them to a crowd. but very few of you have had the opportunity of single-handedly saving as many people. I haven't had that opportunity. In order to have that opportunity, you have to be in a situation where people are under a threat and you're capable of averting that threat. And I've never been in that situation. You might say, well, we can save many lives by donating to charity. But that's when they save lives single-handedly, because in that situation you will be dependent on there being a welfare organisation, a well-organised welfare organisation. So you can't sort of claim credit for all the good that's made out of your money, because it sort of presupposes this organisation. So the first aspect of this claim is that the magnitude of the harm caused can be greater than the magnitude of the benefits provided, and we can kill more individuals, for instance, than we can save lives. A related aspect is that there are normally many more means of causing harm of a given magnitude than of benefiting to the same degree. More ways of disturbing a well-functioning system, like a biological organism, than improving it to the same extent. I mean, in order for us to have a well-functioning system as an organism, there are many things that have to be integrated, work together, and so on. If you tinker with one of those, you will usually cause damage to this system. So there are sort of many ways you can sort of disturb this integrated system, and it's much harder to put something that could improve the function, can make this sort of integrated whole functioning better. Now, as scientific technology increases our power of action, our capacity to cause harm has been magnified to the point at which we can cause what we call ultimate harm. That is to say, make worthwhile life forever impossible on this planet. I mean, as I said, it's always the case that we're capable of causing more harm than we're capable of doing good. When our powers of action have increased, this capacity to harm has reached the point where we can sort of prevent the further existence of worthwhile life on this planet. And notice that the negative value of ultimate harm is enormously great, or could be enormously great, because suppose that if we don't cause ultimate harm now, life could go on being worthwhile for billions of beings for thousands of years on this planet. But if we do, we cause ultimate harm, we prevent that. The negative, the instrumental negative value of that harm would be very great, because we would be preventing a huge amount of good. So ultimate harm is a very bad thing. Now, we look at two ways of causing ultimate harm. One is weapons of mass destruction, nuclear and biological weapons. Now, you might say, well, human beings have had nuclear weapons for 70 years, and nobody has used them as yet. But the situation is getting a bit different now, because it's sort of getting easier to fabricate nuclear weapons, and there is a possibility, more states have nuclear weapons, and there's a possibility of those weapons drifting, or enriched uranium drifting into the hands of terrorists. And there's a greater risk that might use nuclear power, nuclear weapons than states, because if you think of terrorists with the minds of suicide bombers or the pilots of 9/11, they won't fear any retaliation, they won't fear being killed if they start a nuclear attack. Whereas a state using nuclear powers towards another state might fear retaliation. So the situation as regards nuclear weapons has become more dangerous in last years, and will in the future become even more dangerous. Same goes for biological weapons of mass destruction. For instance, you might have read recently about a Dutch team, a Dutch research team, I think, who sort of modified avian flu to make it infect between people, so you don't get infection just from birds. Now that would make this sort of increase the risk of a world epidemic. So that's sort of one threat to our survival. Another threat is climate change and environmental destruction. Now there is an organization, I can't remember the name for the moment, but it sort of calculated a day called Overshoot Day. This is the day when we sort of consumed all the resources that the Earth can produce in a year, and we released as much waste product as the Earth is capable of reabsorbing in a year. Now this overshoot day in the last 3 or 4 years has occurred in August, September. That is to say, we require, we use now 30% more than the Earth produces. So we actually need an Earth and a third of an Earth in order to make things go around for a year. So we're causing an increasing debt. Now, the exploitation, the amount of resources we use are a function of three factors. One is, of course, the size of the human population. The other is the average level of welfare or gross domestic product per capita. And the third one is the efficiency of technology. How much welfare you can, or whatever the unit is, you can get out of natural resources. Now, what is happening is, what is happening for a long time is that the human population grows and it continues to grow. So it is now 7 billion and it's estimated to grow to about 9 billion or maybe 10 billion in 2050. But what's even more frightening is that quite a few very populous countries like China, India and Brazil are increasing their consumption. And these two factors together will, in all probability, make it the case that we use much more of the Earth resources in the near future. Of course, technology might be more effective, but it has to be drastically more effective in order to neutralize this increase. A possible development might be that because of the declining, dwindling resources of climate change and environmental destruction, there might be a war with weapons of mass destruction. That's a possible development. Anyway, there's a well-known British scientist, Martin Rees. He wrote a book a couple of years ago called Our Final Century. He sort of estimated the chances of a risk that human civilization won't survive the present century to 50%. So it's as likely as not that human civilization won't survive the present century, according to him. Now, of course, that's just a guess. I mean, there's no way of making any precise estimate of that sort. But it's obvious in any case that if we consider the threat of ultimate harm from humanity with the threat from natural forces that existed before humanity acquired this capacity, we see a drastic difference, because there were sort of basically just two things that could cause great damage to human civilization before. It was the supervolcanoes and it was hit by massive asteroids. But supervolcanoes erupt sort of once every 100,000 years or something like that, and massive hits by asteroids occur even more infrequently, say once in 100 million years or something like that. So it's indisputable that the world has become a more dangerous place because of modern science. So now what are we going to do about that situation? Now, what makes this situation with the powers of modern science so dangerous is that our moral psychology and morality have evolved to make us fit for life in more closely society with limited technology, which allows us to influence only immediate surroundings in the immediate future. Human beings in the present form have existed, some say, for about 150,000 years. Now, most of that time, an overwhelming larger part of that time we've spent in this sort of small society. It's just the sort of, as I said, the last 50 years or so we've had access to this very advanced technology. So we haven't sort of adapted to those living conditions. Now, we go through it, we sort of know a number of aspects about this psychology we sort of list in the book. One is what Derek Unfit in his book Races and Persons called the bias towards the near future. That's a sort of temporal discount according to which we care much more about the immediate future than the more distant future. This is something that, for instance, makes us sigh of relief if something unpleasant, like a visit to a dentist or something, is postponed. I mean, assuming we don't have a toothache. And this bias makes us disappointed when something pleasant is postponed. So this is something that is obviously of relevance to the problem of the environment in climate change, because the worst effects of climate change, they will kick in the more distant future. And according to this bias, we will be less concerned concerned about that period of time than we are about the present and about our present's welfare and so on. So this means that we will be disinclined to take measures to forestall those effects in the future. Secondly, there is parochial altruism or limited altruism, an altruism which extends only to kin and people we're personally acquainted with. Kin altruism is of course the easiest form of altruism to explain from an evolutionary point of view, because we share 50% of our genes with our parents, and on average the same with our siblings. So it's natural that there should be altruism there. But it's also the case that, probably due to something some people call the exposure effect, the mere fact that we sort of see people on a daily basis makes us like this getting used to people. So, but anyway, this altruism is limited. It doesn't extend to foreigners. So there is this phenomenon of xenophobia. And xenophobia is of course necessary in order, because if altruism had extended indiscriminately to foreigners, there would have been a great risk of us being exploited by those foreigners. So it's necessary that there be some sort of restriction on this altruism, and it's quite easy to sort of recognize somebody as a foreigner, because human societies have a tendency to develop different cultural traditions, different ways of dressing, different languages, accents, and so on. So it's quite easy to spot strangers. And clearly, this parochial altruism is also of importance as regards climate change and such problems as giving aid to developing countries, because if we have this sort of limited altruism, we won't care about people in a distant future or people in distant countries. A related thing is our incapacity to feel proportionate sympathy with larger numbers of sufferers. I mean, we are quite good, most of us, at sympathizing with a single person who's before our eyes. If that person sort of feels pain, winces of pain, and so on. But we can't to the same extent sympathize with hundreds or even 10 people. Our sympathy for 10 people is 10 times as strong as the sympathy for one person. Clearly, this is something of a problem when we have to when we're dealing with large numbers of sufferers in faraway countries. And then there is the act commission doctrine, saying that harming is harder to justify than failing to benefit. Now notice that this tendency ties in very well with it being easier for us to harm than to benefit. Because if it's easier for us to harm, it's more important to have some barrier against harming. And this is precisely what this doctrine does. So, for instance, we have a duty not to kill, and there's a corresponding right not to be killed. And we have a duty not to rape, but we don't have any duty, at least not an equally strong duty, to save lives, and we don't have a duty to have sex with everyone who's sexually starved. So in general, there is this sort of asymmetry, and this doesn't concern just morality. It's our emotional lives as well. For instance, there is this well-known phenomenon that Kahneman and Persson calls loss aversion. That we're more concerned about losses than we care about gains. This is another related thing is that the emotion of fear, it can be much stronger than the positive counterpart of hope and longing. Fear can grow into terror. Somebody can be sort of terrorized of terror, but nobody feels hope to of the same sort of intensity. So there is overall sort of asymmetry in our morality and emotional life, and this is also something that's obviously of relevance for such things as giving aid to developing countries, because we don't feel there is a strong obligation to benefit. So there is a symmetry here. Now this activism doctrine ties in with a notion of responsibility as being based on causation. We have a tendency to think that if we cause something, we are more responsible for it than if we let it happen. If we let it happen, we don't see ourselves as causes of what happens. Because, I mean, the result would be the same as it would be if we weren't even present. So we don't find ourselves, we don't see ourselves as causally as responsible because we don't cause what we let happen. This is also connected with the tendency to believe that if we do something with others in a collective, each of us doing a small bit, collaborating to achieve an effect, that increases our responsibility. But that is quite clearly a very dangerous idea in connection with climate change, because we can easily sort of tell ourselves that what we do, the damage we cause to the climate, and say we drive our car, is imperceptible, negligible. We don't make any difference whatsoever. So we feel we don't have any responsibility for it. And notice that this would be, if this view of responsibility was correct, we could easily eschew responsibility for killing someone, for instance, by just giving each of us a very, very small, say an ordinary painkiller, 20 people each give a person a painkiller, that would kill that person. But we could each say to us, well, we haven't done anything bad because we've just given a person a painkiller, which is completely harmless. So this way of thinking is quite dangerous. Now, so we are in this situation where we have a great extensive mismatch between our advanced technology, powers that actually have a logic, and our moral capacity. Now, what we should we do about that situation? Well, we can't do without advanced technology. We will probably need even more advanced technology if we're going to be able to provide a population of 7 billion and probably at least 9 billion in 2050 with a decent standard of life. We need instead moral enhancement. We need, in order to counteract the tendencies, the 5 tendencies I sort of listed, which and so prevent us from using this technology to cause ultimate harm. So the question is, what means can we achieve this moral enhancement? Well, traditional cultural means of moral enhancement might be effective enough, because if we look at the improvement we've undergone, say, since the first great teachers of morality appeared 2,500 years ago, people like Socrates, Buddha, Confucius, and so on. We haven't really improved a lot, it seems. One thing in which there has been some progress is that punishments have become considerably more humane. It's still the case that many countries have death penalties, but we don't torture people to death anymore. It's very invariably in a few countries, whereas in medieval times that's sort of standard. So punishments have become more humane. It's also the case that the idea that all human beings have equal worth is sort of a standard belief in many countries today. But although there is this equality, it doesn't go to, it doesn't extend all the way to economic equality. In economic terms, the world is probably more unequal than it has ever been. Half a dozen of the most the wealthiest people, they have as much assets as 600 or 700 million people in developing countries. So, in comparison to the sort of huge technological advance, the moral advance has been very slight. So we're proposing that we should explore whatever means that, whether it might be the case that our knowledge of neurobiology could sort of supply us with new means of moral enhancement. We're not supposing that we've exhausted the means of traditional and cultural means. But our argument, our conclusion is rather that we should try to find whatever means there might be of moral enhancement, because the situation is so serious. And in principle, more enhancement by medical means is possible. Yeah.
Okay, let me propose this. Three questions quickly, and we'll see if anyone can respond very quickly. So, is there a question? Yes.
Oh, why don't we just accept that some nation may have to slaughter hundreds of millions of other people? We forget about it very quickly. In our own lifetime, we forgot about 1 million people slaughtered in Rwanda. It's no longer an earth-shattering event.
But would that solve the problem?
I'm not advocating.
but we didn't solve the problem. Because, as you said, it has happened in the past, and we're still in this situation of overconsumption. So,
and you have less consumers, by far.
Sorry?
You have less consumers.
Yes, but human beings have a tendency to reproduce and fill the slack, so to speak.
I said that only because I had to get that brought up.
So, given that you need 100% buy-in for this to work, that seems to me to be you need like 100% buy-in to get this to work. That seems to me to be a rather totalitarian imposition. Tell me, am I wrong?
We would have a universally mandatory program.
Well, what? I mean, I'm not assuming that. I'm assuming that we need a moral enhancement. It could be traditional methods, but they would have to be sort of used more aggressively. And now, I mean, Jonathan Haidt said a couple of hours ago, he was sort of talking about, he said the greatest mystery or miracle for him was how sort of big human society had arisen. Now, there are two things that would make that possible. One is the technological power. The other one is the moral aspect of it. So both of those things would have to go together. Now, my feeling is that in the West, we've sort of emphasized education of science, technology, and so on, at the expense of moral education. So one might say we've had to force kids to learn about technology and science and so on, but haven't sort of made taught them morality to the same extent. What I was sort of proposing is that we put more emphasis on the moral education. But I don't see why we need a totalitarian regime when we didn't need one to sort of